In the first part of this review, we will discuss with you the conflict in the Middle Eastern states. And in the second part of this video, we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine. Well, let's begin. We'll start with the main news. And as you can see, there's a lot of it today. Today, the map is oversaturated with various events, and mutual shelling continues. Iran continues to launch missile strikes, drone strikes, and ballistic missile strikes against United States military facilities throughout the entire Middle East region, starting from the state of Iran, extending to Israel, and reaching the very northernmost part of Iraq, the city of Erbil. In turn, the coalition comprised of the United States and Israel continues to launch strikes, primarily against Western Iran and also against the capital of the Iranian state, the city of Tehran. However, today's attacks are no longer simply marked by the chaotic nature that we could observe during the initial days, while everyone was generally trying to grasp the details of this conflict. Today, a certain system is already taking shape, both from Iran's side and from the United States of America. Iran is currently working on several fronts. The first, and most likely, the most prominent direction is hunting the American fleet. Over the past day, and the last 48 hours, a lot of news was coming in, including misinformation and video footage generated by AI about attacks made on American ships located south of Iran and south of the Persian Gulf. Sources are reporting that strikes were even carried out against the American aircraft carrier strike group, the Abraham Lincoln, and information is coming in that Iran has launched 4 ballistic missiles. However, beyond this particular piece of information, there is nothing else available online. There is not a single piece of credible video evidence that could confirm that these missiles were actually able to reach the aforementioned carrier group. On the other hand, today a large number of reliable sources are reporting that, amidst these possible strikes, the American command has decided to withdraw its carrier strike group further south, towards the base of Diego Garcia, which belongs to the United Kingdom. This island, and by the way, before the start of this conflict, a big dispute arose between the USA and the United Kingdom. I remind you that then, Keir Starmer did not give his consent for the use of the islands in the Diego Garcia area for striking against Iranian territory. I'd like to remind you that back in 2025, when attacks were carried out against Iran's nuclear infrastructure facilities, these attacks were also conducted using B-2 bombers, which were, at that time, located on this very island. It appears that today this conflict and dispute is being resolved, and therefore the American side will, in the very near future, activate this base to intensify its pressure on Iran. In turn, Iran also continues its blockade of the Persian Gulf. Today and yesterday, a lot of monitoring footage came in, showing the aftermath of drone and missile strikes on tankers trying to break out of the blockade. Today, information is coming in that a total of about 150 tankers are blocked and unable to leave the Persian Gulf. And this, of course, will in turn affect oil prices and, in principle, not only crude oil, but also petroleum products. Furthermore, today, certain individual states are publishing photographs, video materials, and issuing statements that strikes are being carried out not only against tankers, but also against various oil rigs, oil extraction sites, and LNG production facilities. Today, for example, several states from the Persian Gulf have reported that they are halting LNG production, following strikes by Iranian missiles and drones across all oil-producing and oil-refining infrastructure. And amidst these reports, information is now emerging that the price of gas in Europe has already risen by 30%. Today, not only is the price of gas rising across the European continent, today, all Russian stocks also surged, the shares of all Russian companies directly involved in oil and gas extraction and refining. Today, the entire Russian stock market linked to this industry is completely in the green. Well, let's return to Iran. Attacks are hitting infrastructure targets. Strikes continue against American bases in Qatar, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates. These regions are experiencing the most significant attacks, and we observe that despite the operation of American and Israeli air defense systems, we can clearly see it doesn't show a 100% effective result. Furthermore, today, information is beginning to surface that, as a result of friendly fire, and specifically the Kuwaiti air defense system, which, it appears, is primarily comprised of US-provided air defense systems, for some reason either shot down or damaged several American F-15 and F-16 aircraft. These were the first images, released by various sources, where we can now see the aftermath of the strike. An American F-15 jet crashes in Kuwaiti territory, and this information, a result of friendly fire, was officially confirmed by American sources. Here are a few more shots. Overall, only 2 were published, 2 episodes, just 2 frames, and, apparently, within the day, as a result of friendly fire attacks, several such aircraft were shot down. And a little later, photos also appeared showing American pilots who had managed to evacuate and were then rescued, perhaps by local civilians who picked them up. So these are already the first losses for the United States of America. Also today, and the American CENTCOM command has confirmed, and that since the beginning of the conflict with Iran, they have already sustained casualties, and the losses amount to approximately 4 American soldiers. These figures are being provided today specifically by the coalition. Furthermore, we can see that the coalition is not standing still, and the coalition is expanding. Over the past day, information has repeatedly come from Cyprus. American, or rather, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and British sources reported that Cyprus was hit by drone attacks. And today, some smoke, haziness, and fires were recorded. And already today, the United Kingdom, amidst all these strikes, is declaring that the United Kingdom may join the coalition of Israel and the US, and could begin striking Iran as well. Moreover, today a very important statement from Keir Starmer has emerged, which states that not only can the United Kingdom join this coalition, but also suggests to US President Donald Trump to use Ukrainian experience, as well as Ukrainian specialists, to, so to speak, deter Iranian drones and missiles. Ukrainian specialists, according to Keir Starmer, could, so to speak, share their experience with Western partners in repelling Iranian attacks. However, if we are to speak specifically about this particular statement, then naturally, it is necessary to read between the lines. Naturally, it can be stated with absolute certainty that these specialists operating within the territory of Ukraine, they are truly few and far between. Their numbers are not in the tens of millions, nor even in the tens of thousands. This literally amounts to perhaps just a few dozen individuals who, since the year 2022, have been actively involved in organizing air defense systems across Ukraine. These are, of course, most likely highly qualified specialists. And if these specialists are taken from Ukraine's territory and transferred to Saudi Arabia, then we ourselves must clearly understand that this could very significantly impact Ukraine's overall air defense. Moreover, naturally, we understand that, well, in conditions where the Russian Federation launches massive strikes every 5 to 10 days, no one will of their own free will send these specialists to the Middle East. So these statements by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, suggest that apparently these specialists are not actually serving in the Ukrainian armed forces, but perhaps they are serving other foreign states or private companies. Therefore, they could be very easily taken and redeployed to that region where they are very much needed. United States of America and other countries in the coalition. Today, in Berlin, there's already talk of joining the operation against Iran. German Chancellor Merkel has repeatedly stated in the past day that Germany must certainly join, and so on and so forth. Therefore, we see that the coalition against Iran is expanding at this stage. But, if we are to discuss Iran itself, then after the first day, the initial shocking day of attacks, when according to Israeli sources and the President of the United States of America, the American side and its coalition, a coalition with Israel, the US managed, with a deadly strike, so to speak, to eliminate Iran's spiritual leader, Ali Khamenei. This was, of course, such a truly shocking day for the entire Iranian leadership. Furthermore, Israel published a table, a comprehensive list of all Iranian officials who were, let's say, eliminated during the first hours of fighting and shelling. Then, of course, there was a very big question. Would Iran be able to maintain overall control? But we can see, you and I, that Iran has maintained its governability. And what's more, by the end of March 1st, 2026, information was received stating that a new individual had been appointed to the position of supreme leader. This is Ayatollah Arafi. Here is his photograph. He is now the spiritual leader. Furthermore, today, the Iranian authorities are already publishing photographs where we can directly observe the meeting of the highest echelons of Iranian power. These are the three most influential individuals: the president, the head of the judicial system, and also the spiritual leader. It is precisely these three individuals who are currently governing Iran, determining how the country will develop and how the conflict will unfold specifically from Iran's side. Furthermore, today information is emerging, or rather, the US president is disseminating information, that Iranians have approached him with a proposal to resume the negotiation process. And the US president said they should have done this a long time ago. But Iran today, a little later, commented that Iran is not going to stop the conflict, and the conflict will continue. And of course, the question arises about Iran's allies. At the present moment, of course, no one is openly acting. But various experts claim that behind Iran stand both China, providing intelligence, reconnaissance information, and infrastructure, as well as the Russian Federation. This is because a large number of missile strikes are being carried out, and sources report that over 1,000 missiles were launched in just a few days. And some individual experts are suggesting that it's possible Iran on its own was not actually in a position to produce such a significant number of missiles. But we will certainly continue to observe how this entire situation develops. Today, another important thing to note is that Saudi Arabia was attacked. More precisely, an oil refinery located in the eastern part of the country, near the settlement of Rastanura, was hit. Here's the footage published by local sources, and this is one of the largest oil refineries. And there was information indicating that Saudi Arabia had temporarily halted product manufacturing in that region. And this, of course, will also push up prices for oil products, for oil in the world, and push them up very, very significantly. Well, we'll have to observe how the situation develops further. But one thing is clear. The conflict, it seems, will last longer than 13 or 14 days, unlike the previous conflict. Donald Trump says that the United States intends to carry out and, so to speak, maintain the conflict for 3 to 4 weeks. But, perhaps, the conflict will also be prolonged. Moreover, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that a very important situation is currently developing. The conflict originally began between a coalition comprising Israel and the United States of America, opposing Iran. As a direct result of this confrontation, Iran was compelled to commence launching strikes against military infrastructure targets located within the territories of populated areas such as the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, and so on and so forth, and even the northern part of Iraq. And we are witnessing how, step by step, the Persian Gulf nations are becoming embroiled in conflict with Iran, and an increasing number of declarations are being made by various, shall we say, representatives of different states, stating that Iran will be held accountable for all these strikes. From this, we can draw the conclusion that there is an extremely high likelihood that within 4 to 5 weeks, the United States will disengage from the conflict in the Middle East, and they will be engaged in supplying weapons, supplying missiles, supplying drones, and providing intelligence specifically to the states of the Persian Gulf region to confront Iran, while they themselves will not be taking part in this conflict. Perhaps such a scenario is already emerging on the horizon, and I want to tell you, I won't be surprised in the slightest if that's exactly what happens. Next, let's turn our attention to Ukraine. Today, Ukrainian authorities are reporting that the Russian Federation is preparing for a new strike, which will most likely be launched in the very near future. The Russian side, of course, needs to understand the current level of Ukraine's air defense, whether Patriot systems and missiles remain, or if everything has been completely moved to the Persian Gulf. Therefore, the Russian side will be verifying the overall combat capability of Ukraine's air defense. And if the situation proves to be such that Ukraine's air defense ceased to function with the start of the conflict in the territory, let's say, of the Persian, the Middle East, then possibly the Russian side will intensify pressure. Well, now let's turn our attention to the front line and discuss the most recent adjustments. And we will start with the northern sectors, where the Russian army is continuing its offensive in the area of Sumy City. Over the past few days, a significant number of adjustments have been recorded in this sector. I would like to remind you that, according to the latest information, the most recent data, primarily from pro-Russian sources. The Russian army has begun an assault on the settlement of Mirapoli, which is located east of the city. It's possible that soon we'll be getting more news from this direction. And I would like to remind you that it is the Sumy region, more precisely, its northern part, as well as the northeastern part of the Chernihiv region, that are being used by Ukrainian units to launch strikes deep into the territory of the Russian Federation. Therefore, in any case, high-intensity combat operations in this direction are inevitable. And here, in these frames, we can observe how the Russian side, during reconnaissance operations, detects another multiple-launch rocket system of the armed forces of Ukraine and destroys it using drones. This strike occurred in the area of the M02 highway. That is, what we were talking about. And concerning the topic of these massive strikes, yes, this is a very important topic because over the last 24 hours, the Ukrainian side has launched several waves of these massive strikes, targeting the southern regions of the Russian Federation itself and also the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Both pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian sources reported a very large number of drones. These are the kinds of images that were published overnight by pro-Ukrainian cartographers and pro-Russian sources. And here is yet another map that has been published. And as you can clearly see, based on these maps, most of the strikes were primarily directed at the populated area of Novorossiysk, which, incidentally, is quite a surprising occurrence, because just a few days prior, the Trump administration had warned Ukrainian authorities not to launch any more attacks on the oil and gas, on the energy infrastructure of Novorossiysk, specifically its ports, and particularly its pipelines, since, in this specific region, a great many American investments are involved, let's say, which in turn are connected with Kazakhstan. But we see, despite all these statements, the Ukrainian side launched an attack, and today several video frames are emerging, while the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reports that during the night, specifically between March 1st and March 2nd, the Russian side managed to shoot down 172 drones, including 67 over the Black Sea and 66 over the Krasnodar region. So the majority of the drones were located specifically in this area. Next, we'll move to the northeastern Kharkiv region, where fighting continues mainly in two areas. The first area is northwest of Kharkiv. These are the settlements of Zolochiv and Kozacha Lopan. If we increase the number of updates from February 1st, we will see that there is quite high activity in this direction. The Russian side is not only, so to speak, conducting offensive operations, but also actively scouting the terrain. A large amount of objective control footage has also been released, showing strikes on energy infrastructure targets using Garand-type drones. But no active advancement in this sector has been reported so far. Although there were several reports that Russian units managed to secure the Vetranarna territory, this information was not subsequently confirmed. A different picture, let's say, is developing further east in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv region. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, as well as the Sever group of forces, are publishing information stating that Russian units have managed to significantly advance in the vicinity of the settlement of Krugloye. Based on the Ministry of Defense report, we are making the appropriate adjustment. This means Russia is regularly advancing here, and it seems the Kharkiv and Sumy directions will be among the highest priority areas for Russian units' offensive operations during the spring and summer military campaigns. We can see that over time, as this conflict unfolds, the priorities of both the Russian Federation and Ukraine are changing. If initially, for Russian units, Sumy, Chernihiv, and Kharkiv regions held no great interest from the perspective of economic or potential opportunities, and so on and so forth. But with the specific growth in the capabilities of Ukraine's armed forces, particularly in the use of missiles and drones, these territories are becoming increasingly prioritized by the Russian command, because drone strikes are already being carried out across the entire western part of the Russian Federation, and drones can fly quite deep into Russian territory, 1,000, even 2,000 kilometers. Therefore, this area becomes an absolute priority for the Russian side. Next, we will move with you to the Lyman sector of the front, from which a large number of important news reports are coming in. Over the past 24 hours, the map in this particular direction has been significantly adjusted. This is precisely how the map still looked on February 26, 2026. And from that moment on, the map was regularly updated. Let me remind you that on the 27th, A video was published from the central part of Drobyshev, where we could observe the Russian flag raised in the central part of the settlement. Back then, we didn't rush to make adjustments, although some pro-Russian experts had already painted most of Drobyshev as under the control of Russian units. But only today, March 2nd, 2026, the Russian Ministry of Defense confirms that Russian troops have significantly improved their positions in the vicinity of the settlement of Drobyshevo and advanced beyond its boundaries. And based on the report from the Russian Ministry of Defense, we are making the corresponding adjustment. So, in actual fact, in front of Lyman, or more precisely, between Lyman and the positions of the Russian army, there are no longer any settlements remaining, neither from the east, nor from the north, nor the northwest. The Russian side has now completely taken Lyman into a semi-encirclement from all directions. And in the near future, the final assault on the city itself will begin from at least 3 directions, from the west, from the north, and from the east. However, it's possible that before the assault begins, the Russian army will try to move from Drobyshevo to the south with the aim of taking physical control of the last supply routes that Ukrainian armed forces units use to support the garrison in the Lyman area. And only after that, the actual battle for this settlement will commence. In any case, this will occur during the spring military campaign. On the Eastern Slavic front, reports are coming in about significant advances and improved positions of the Russian army east of Lyman, east of the settlement of Kaleniki. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reports on the advance of the Russian army in the area of the settlement of Reznikovka. Based on the Ministry of Defense's report, we are making the corresponding adjustment. I'd like to remind you that the initial reports regarding the commencement of military operations in the vicinity of the Reznikovo settlement were in fact already published around mid-February, indicating a substantial advance. At that time, the chief of the general staff of the Russian army announced the possibility of an imminent breakthrough, that Russian troops would manage to breach the defenses. And now, after, practically almost 14 days, give or take, it has happened. At this moment, the fighting for the settlement of Kaleniki is already becoming protracted. It is the next populated area to the west of Reznikovka. A distinctive characteristic of this particular settlement, Kaleniki, is that it is a very strongly fortified populated area, entirely encircled by a significant number of strong points, please observe. And to its southwest, and to its west, and to its north, and to its northeast, for all these strong points, the Russian army still has to conduct combat operations. But overall, after the fall of the Kaleniki settlement, the Russian army will no longer encounter any populated areas further west in a straight line towards the Nikolaevka settlement. Apparently, by the time combat operations for Kaleniki are completed, the Russian army apparently plans to reach the southern and southwestern outskirts of the settlement in the Alexandrovka area, in order to continue moving further west and northwest from 3 directions towards the settlement of Nikolaevka and towards the Sloviansk power plant. In the Konstantinovka sector, there's a minor adjustment on the eastern outskirts. Let me remind you that after the dam's destruction, the Russian army is actively assaulting the city's southern outskirts. However, a week, possibly even 2, has passed since these assaults began. But at this stage, Russian units have only managed to secure positions along the city's perimeter without penetrating deep into the settlement itself. In the Zaporizhia direction, there are no changes. There's a slight adjustment, but it mostly confirms the information previously provided by the Ministry of Defense. Let me remind you that a few days ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported advances in the area of the settlement of Razvianka. However, at that time, most cartographers refused to make adjustments because, this is a very important settlement, so everyone decided to wait until more information became available. And just yesterday, pro-Russian sources published video material on which we can all observe how the fierce fighting unfolded for the settlement of Razvianka, and not only there. And according to this video, an episode was recorded where Russian soldiers raised the flag in the very, very easternmost remote part. Therefore, based on this video footage, we made an adjustment exclusively to the very easternmost, remote part of the settlement of Razvianka in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. At this stage, one thing is absolutely clear. Despite the fact that information and video footage confirming complete control over the settlement may not yet have been officially published, the very first video materials have already begun to surface, which indeed confirm that there is significant movement along this front, and Russian units are gradually establishing their positions. Additionally, there are adjustments in the southwestern sector. Based on various mapping services, the armed forces of the Russian Federation are improving their positions between Mali Sherbaki and Sherbaki. And we see that at this stage, the Russian side is trying to straighten the front line between Pavlovka and Mali Shcherbaki and take full control of the only main supply line in this direction. So, the Zaporizhia direction continues at a fairly high pace. And I'll remind you again that there is an opinion that already in the next 24 to 48 hours, the Russian side may launch another massive, combined strike on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.